Hello, and welcome to the Designing Successful Startups podcast. I'm your host, Jothy Rosenberg, aka the Incorrigible Entrepreneur. Designing Successful Startups explores the challenges and rewards of entrepreneurship, overcoming adversity, and where grit and perseverance can get you. My new book, Tech Startup Toolkit: How to Launch Strong and Exit Big, based on my experiences founding 9 startups, seeks to help early-stage founders avoid the many pitfalls founders can experience. This podcast adds to that stories of many fascinating founders who are my guests. You can see all the episodes of this podcast on my website, jothyrosenberg.com. Also, please follow and rate us at podchaser.com, Designing Successful Startups. Now, let me introduce today's guests, the principals at Diadem Capital, Stephanie Rieben and Joe Hammill. Stephanie spent over a decade on Wall Street, starting out in investment banking at Goldman Sachs and Citigroup before jumping over to capital markets on the equities trading floors at both Citi and later Berenberg Bank, where she ran the U.S. relationship business covering buy-side clients. In 2019, she exited banking to jump into the startup world, working for 2 venture-backed fintech funding platforms covering investors. In 2022, she co-founded Diadem Capital with Joe after seeing how founders were struggling to fundraise. Born in Germany, yet raised on both sides of the Atlantic, and an undergraduate degree from the Lausanne Hotel School in Switzerland, she is trilingual. She holds an MBA from Georgetown University as well. Every break she gets, she loves spending with her 2 little boys, who she's raising in the suburbs of New York City with her French husband. Joe spent 10 years on the trading floor at Citigroup, covering both equity and credit. While at Citi, he led global projects for Citi Velocity, the #1 Wall Street web-based data and analytics platform. He's also familiar with the founder's journey, as this is Joe's 4th startup. When he's not building products, Joe is likely talking about fantasy football, Josh Allen, and why this is finally the year the Bills will win the Super Bowl. And here's Joe and Stephanie. Hi, you guys.
Hi. Thanks for having us, Jothy.
Hi, Jothy.
I'm thrilled to have you. So here's how I like to start these. I like to ask people, because everybody's always interested, I like to ask you where you're originally from and where do you live now. So, Joe, you first.
Okay. I am originally from Rochester, New York. I've lived in a bunch of different places, and currently there's a small little hint in my background of where I actually am right now, which is Buffalo, New York, where we're headquartered. I like to say I am a long Josh Allen throw from the stadium, which is about 2 miles away. And yes, I do believe he can throw it 2 miles.
Okay. Stephanie, you've been all over the world. So
Right.
where are you from originally? What town in Germany?
Yeah, so originally born in Frankfurt, raised in a small town called Trier, which is on the western border to Luxembourg. It's actually the oldest city of Germany, which I always talk about. Was one of the 3 Roman capitals of the Roman Empire, so has lots of Roman ruins, over 2,000 years old, so get back, U.S. But studied in Switzerland afterwards, came to New York City 18 years ago, and I'm still in New York. Married a Frenchman, but we're here in the suburbs of New York City called Westchester as the county, and the town is called Mamaroneck.
So did you learn English at a really early age?
Yeah, so that's another part that makes it more complicated, but I grew up for 5 years, so from 2 months old until the age of 5 in Virginia. So technically my first language was even English because my dad worked for GE for 35 years and was with their robotics division in Charlottesville, Virginia back then in the 80s. So I spent 5 years there. But then
So
school system in Germany. So elementary school through graduating high school.
Okay, so you don't have any accent in English. Do you have an accent? Do you have an accent when you speak German?
I don't know. I speak to my parents German every day when I call them, and then I have 2 kids that speak German to me every day. So we're a trilingual household, German, French,
And
and
then,
English.
do you have an accent when you speak French?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So you speak to your husband in French, but the kids
No.
speak German?
English. So my husband and I
Oh.
speak English, and then I speak German to the kids, and he speaks French to the kids. So I have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, 2 boys.
So you're going to get the kids to be trilingual too.
Yeah. So
Wow,
all 3 languages perfectly already, which is like great.
that is so amazing. I mean, the number of Americans that are even bilingual is like just like a very small. It's just terrible. I mean, my wife and I tried. We both studied French a lot. She was actually a French major in college. We've both been to France a lot. We understand it perfectly, but you get rusty so quickly. I even went to school in France. I went to the University of Strasbourg.
Oh, nice. So Strasbourg is super close to Trier, where I'm from. It's like 2 hours.
Well, Strasbourg used to be in Germany,
Right.
right?
Alsace. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, so Stephanie, talk a little bit about. Let's just jump right into the technical stuff, the business stuff. So, talk about your views on the state of venture, and in the market today. It's definitely changed recently, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, sure. Happy to talk about it. So, since we're a business that helps startups fundraise, we're quite in the middle of it, right? So, we hear every day from startups how it's hard to fundraise, but we also hear every day from VCs how it's hard to fundraise. So, I'm always on the investor side. Joe's always on the founder side. So, he may have other views than I do. But from the investor side, what I'm hearing is number one, last year was like one of the lowest capital deployment years in like a long time, since like 2021 highs, but then also even before that. And a lot of VCs are hurting right now because they're not able to raise the funds that they wanted to raise, hence they deploy less capital. And then what I've just heard last week, actually, a lot of VC funds, their LPs are not making their capital calls. Like the LPs are having liquidity constraints that they can't even meet the commitments that they had said, okay, we're going to put like 2 million this year or whatever the size is. They're just not able to manage the capital calls and they're just defaulting. So that's like a big issue we're seeing right now. So my view is more like, let's get this year over. Hopefully we'll have some rate cuts that will bring liquidity back to the market. And then that will help like startups. We've been able to fundraise for startups. We've been able to match them. It's getting better, but we're just not back to like where it used to be.
I mean, with the capital calls, I mean, there's a contract that says they have to honor the capital calls that they commit to.
Yeah, I don't know what the legal repercussions are, but I've been hearing that like VCs are having trouble collecting that money. So,
I mean, I think that this is one of those situations where what's the VC firm going to do? You can't go start suing your LPs.
Right.
If you do, you'll never raise money again.
Correct.
The up ones are re-upping. So then I guess they go to the ones that are deploying saying, hey, how about increasing your commitment so they can make up for it?
Yeah, well, I've definitely been hearing how hard it is so I don't really talk to VCs that much about how their process is going, but I'm sort of on the same side of things that you are, Joe, and it's brutal out there for the startups.
Yeah, it's a world of have and have-nots. And, there's a lot of headlines in TechCrunch that paint probably a rosier picture than what is actually out there for founders. So I talk to all different types of founders, first-time founders, pedigree founders, repeat founders with successful exits, and trying to... Where I see the biggest struggle sometimes with founders is especially with first-time founders. they have this idea that venture capital funds the building of your business. They do not do that. Venture capital accelerates already built businesses. The only ones who are able to have venture capital build their business are repeat founders who have successfully proven they can do this, or really highly pedigreed founders. And so there's this, sometimes that's a hard conversation that I have to have with founders, explaining like it's really hard to get funding in the earliest stages if you haven't already built your product and having some revenue traction if you've never raised venture capital before.
Well, that's true for VCs, but what I say to founders is, look, in the earliest days, go try to do friends and family. Mm-hmm. Just to get $500,000, from, yep. And I did that for Dover, and then I went out and was working with angels. Angels are the group that, most angels will fund before there's any revenue, but they need to see some proof. They need to see they need to see great market, big problem, you have a solution for it, and here's a little proof that in some form, that you can do it. Yeah. And it was only because there was there's a few firms, both in Silicon Valley and in Boston, that are very focused on seed stage, and they will fund side by side sometimes with an angel. That's what we did. We got an angel group and a seed stage fund, and they invested in the idea, and I was a multi-time founder, so that was helpful. And of course, as you guys know, it got really tough for us later, and that's when we started to work together.
Yes. Or the early days. We got you some good intros. It was still a challenging. That was right when the market had started to shift. And if you had raised 9 months earlier, it would have been, that's when money was free. And they were just passing it out, and everyone could raise money at that time. And then all of a sudden, as soon as interest rates went up, people started being more selective with what they were deploying.
So Joe, this is kind of on the topic that you talk a lot about what founders get wrong about fundraising. Is there anything more you want to say about what they get wrong?
So I think in general, what we do, like an open office hours every other week, and I kind of say the same thing every time, which is there's 3 types of founders, and there's 3 levers that you can pull in a fundraise, right? So I already said the types of founders. You have a repeat founder who has successfully exited and made money for their investors. That's a big caveat, right? Did they have a good exit for their investors? Then you have pedigree founders. So those are ones at early tech startups, really big. So if they're, or it's the Facebook, the Googles, and their Stanford MBAs, right? That's kind of the pedigree. And then the 95% of the other founders are first-time founders. And so founders always give advice, and they try and be helpful, but founders are really bad at giving the context of why that advice worked uniquely for them, versus they then give advice to a founder, and the founder's like, well, I have a very successful founder telling me to do this. Well, right, but that founder has already successfully exited a business, that those rules don't apply. And so for first-time founders, you have the traction or signal lever, and then you have valuation. Those are really the levers that you can pull. You either need some kind of traction or signal to show that you are a good bet outside of the box, or you have, if you don't have it all, then you have to compromise on valuation. And sometimes that's where founders don't want to. They're like, well, no, I'm raising my $1 million pre-seed on a safe note at a 10 or 15 million cap.
So, right. So people get all wrapped around the axle about a few things that I just wish they didn't. One is their current valuation of their company. And they, if you've got something that's going to be a barn burner, then fine, it's going to work out. But don't try to push your valuation up too high, because you can really screw yourself if you push your valuation up and then you hit a speed bump, which you're going to, and then your valuation comes down, and that's horrible. And the other thing that people just don't understand is dilution. So they'll say, well, no, I don't want to bring in, more money because it's going to dilute me more. Well, it's like, well, but don't you need that money to scale and grow? Because if you don't, then the dilution is going to be the least of your problems.
I always like to say the only valuation that truly matters is your last one.
Yes, of course. And what I say so I'll be sitting around, I do a all company meeting every week, once a week. And I'll be talking and say, okay, so we're going to be bringing this much in. And so there's going to be this much dilution in the company. And people start going, I could see them say, oh my God, what is my stake worth? And I said, now just remember something. Let's suppose there's a dilution of 10% of because we brought in somebody and we had to create more shares. But what if the valuation went up by 2x?
Yep.
Now, does that matter to you? Because the end result is, I'm worth more, so it's okay. But they focus on dilution, and So, okay, so look, it's unusual for to talk to somebody that's involved with helping raise money and themselves participating in funding companies that is also a startup. And Joe, in fact, you've done like 4 of these. So you guys are a startup. Maybe I'll go back to you, Steph, and say, what is it that you're doing? What is it you're trying to build?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked. So basically what we always explain to founders and then investors, and then the investors that invest in us, is we're creating a model where we're very founder aligned, but at the same time, we're incentivizing investors to work with us. So what we're doing is we're bringing 2 parties together. Our slogan is basically to create a private markets ecosystem where we're connecting private companies to private capital. We're doing it all for a success-based fee, which is a very low success-based fee. So we charge 3% on equity intros, 1% on debt intros, and it's only on the capital we introduce. So it's a big anti-banker model, number one. So the traditional bankers, investment bankers, they charge like minimum 5%, but we've heard it go up to like as high as like 14%. Like a couple months ago, somebody told us they do it on the full round, not just like the capital they actually bring in. Then they have high retainer fees, like monthly, to help them with like pitch deck, fine, but also crazy models that nobody needs at like seed stage, like M&A style, like financial models with like all these different scenarios. You don't need that at that stage. And then investors don't like that model, like of the investment bankers that charge a ton, because they're like, well, that's super dilutive technically to the capital I bring in. Like if they're writing a $5 million check and already like a big chunk is going to paying off some banker, that's not what they like. So what we're doing is we're also sending investors deal flow free of charge completely that's pre-vetted. So yes, we are a platform. We've built the tech. It's onboarding. I always compare it to Airbnb when an investor logs in and you can see houses. On Airbnb, an investor logs in and sees deals, but very specific, curated. So at a given time, they might just see 2 deals. And at a given time, we only work with maybe 8 or 10 founders because we're focused on, number one, fundability. So we're trying to get these guys funded. Right now we're hovering at like a 75% founder funded rate of like all the founders we've ever worked with. They actually most of them got funded. We helped like 33 companies raise over $142 million. So we're really proud of that because we've only been around for 2.5 years. So we're a venture-backed fintech startup ourselves. We're still pre-seed. And we're working on B2B SaaS companies, fintech, cybersecurity, as you know, like all different sectors where we're working with seed to Series B startups, predominantly US and North America focused, so Canada, but we also look at Western Europe. Our very first deal was actually a German CEO, and the second deal was like a UK deal, but after that, we really only did Canada and US, but we're open to obviously Western Europe. But most of the investors that we have by now, and we're almost at 1,000 investors and funders, like firms, we have mostly US. And we're basically creating this ecosystem of matching them up. And VCs send us 75% of the deal flow we've done so far was actually VCs and lenders directly sending us their active portcos or borrowers. And they're saying, oh, Diadem, you're so helpful. Like your fee is reasonable. You're a value add because you're actually getting more capital into our companies. So that's been great. And we just had our third repeat client, which we're really proud of. So we've helped like a seed stage company do a debt round. We helped the Series A company do a debt round. We have like a debt deal that then upsized their facility and got more debt into their round. So really proud of that. And I'll stop here. I'll let Joe add some more of his 2 cents.
Yeah, no, it's you know, the at the end of the day, what we've built is really a trust marketplace, because the reason intermediaries haven't succeeded in the past within this particular industry is it's just the either the fees or the quality of deals haven't been there, and they try and hide behind their fees. So there's a lack of trust that an intermediary can do right by everyone involved. And so that's where we've come in, and we've aligned the success of the investor, of the founder, and us. Right? That's an important thing too, is we have to be venture scalable as well. And how do you aren't able to do that with a platform that charges a SaaS fee, because eventually what you're going to do is, instead of looking at how fundable the company is, will they pay me $8,000 up front or $10,000 up front? It becomes a revenue game. And for us, we only get paid on success. So we have to be confident that A, our founders will fund, and B, our investors are going to like that company, that founder, and want to deploy capital into it.
So do you see where a VC who's maybe going to lead a deal and has put in a term sheet, but is now wanting to build out their syndicate, do they see you as a way to help them do that?
Yeah, most definitely. So typically they come to us and say, okay, we let it pre-seed seed. We're not going to lead at A, find us a lead. But we've also gotten, hey, we're the lead. We went to our co-investor buddies. Typically, every VC fund seems to have like 20 to 30 funds they typically exchange deal flow with, and then that's done. There's 6,000 VC funds in the US alone. So we've tapped just a tiny part of that, but we've been able to introduce them to other VCs that then come into a round. So that's actually a new SaaS model we're trying to also test out for investors to come to us and be like, hey, we can show you co-investors for a fee, and then we're not going to actually meet the founder. But generally, we bring in co-investors into rounds and can help on debt and equity at the same time. So we've done also both at the same time. Like a lender comes to us and says, we want to underwrite this debt deal, but we need more equity into the business so we can do it. And then we help get more equity, and then they can underwrite the debt.
Yeah. I always say to founders, look, you have your network, right? And then the investors have their network. But the total network is huge. And the only reason we can exist is because everything is so siloed and fragmented that the biggest investors in the industry, the Sequoias, the Andreessens, do not have contacts at every single family office, emerging manager, all the VCs. No one has it. So that's how we're able to exist.
I like to always talk about grit, because everybody, in no matter what role they play in the startup community, is there because they identified that they have a bunch of grit and they can do this, because it's really hard. Whether you're a founder, whether you're an investor, well, they have it a lot easier. But and what you guys are doing isn't any different. You guys are startup. I mean, I saw you guys. You're scrappy, because you weren't called Diadem Capital when I was working with you. I don't honestly remember what you were called, but
well, Diadem Capital, but we were part of another entity at one point, but then we spun out. But just to allude to like the grit part, I mean, it's a hustle, right? And it's a roller coaster ride. And when you're on the upward trajectory on the roller coaster, it's so much fun. But when it goes down real fast, you're like, oh, shoot. Because it's an up and down, right? And we're a transaction-oriented business. So we have a great big deal close. We're like, yes, awesome. We got like a lot of money into this deal. We're super excited. And then we're pumped. The investors are happy. We get great reviews. But then there's like a couple deals where there's not as much interest. And then we're like, maybe there's some sectors we shouldn't get into. So now we've learned like CPG consumer is really hard on the equity side. Trying to get equity investments in, it's much better suited for debt if they have good revenue. And they need like inventory financing, or they need accounts payable financing, or like a factoring shop. There we can help. But on the equity side, VCs, for example, want like for a consumer company to be approaching like 10 million in revenue. If it's like a product like food and beverage, they want them to be in like 4,000 stores. That's like Whole Foods nationwide and Wegmans nationwide and like all those stores. It's like a ton. So we've learned that over time, sometimes you have to be selective. And that's like what it means to be a startup, right? You still figure out what's the ICP and like what works, what doesn't work. And it's fun to be with startups and helping startups at the same time.
That's great. I want to get this to be a little bit more personal. Stephanie, where do you think your grit comes from that's enabling you to do this?
Like for the teardrop story of like the immigrant story, right? Like coming to the US and having to like elbow your way into investment banking. That was like tough for me. I mean, Joe and I, we met at Citi. So he spent 10 years there. I spent 8 years there. So I think it comes from that, like having to always like been like the underdog and the outsider and coming in.
Was that a male dominated industry?
Yeah, 100%. White male dominated, and definitely American, and not very many immigrants or people with an accent. I tried to assimilate, but actually, I don't know if he'll ever watch this video, but like my boss always made fun of my accent and about the way I said things. And I was always really upset about it. But I appreciate you saying that I don't have an accent. I know I have a slight accent still left. I try to be a spy. You just don't know where I'm from in the U.S. Who knows where? Boston maybe too.
Well, Boston people have a lot stronger accent than you ever will. Okay, so you had to kick ass because you're an immigrant and a woman. But you're white, so you didn't have to worry about that part.
I'm darker.
In a male-dominated industry, in a particularly, I think, somewhat vicious male-dominated industry. Honestly,
yeah.
I mean,
that's changed a lot in like the last decade, but yeah.
I mean, I watched The Wolf of Wall Street. I actually read the book and watched the movie. And
yeah,
and did you?
But yeah.
Did you see some of those kind of antics?
Yeah, especially on the trading floor. It's even worse than in investment banking. Yeah, for sure. Because I did half. I did half my career in investment banking, half on the trading floor.
And that's where you met Joe.
That's where Joe and I met. We were on the same team. We sat back to back on the trading floor.
No, I mean,
that's where you have like
images.
It's like because you're on the trading floor, sitting next to each other. You know, like. You hear everything, what everybody's talking about.
There's no secrets on the trading floor. Everyone sits 3 feet apart. It's all open.
It just sounds insane. And when things get heated, I mean, it just sounds like the stress is just palpable. Okay, Joe, you you have always seemed to me to be a guy with a fair amount of grit, but I never asked this question of you before.
Yeah.
So other than being a fan of the Buffalo Bills, which of course requires a hell of a lot of grit.
They are going to win the Super Bowl this year. Mark my words. They might not be betting favorites, but I believe in Josh Allen and that Bills defense this year.
Okay. And if they could beat Kansas City, that would be great, because I'm kind of tired of seeing Kansas City.
Me too.
Yeah. So tell me more about your grit, your source of grit.
The perfectly honest answer is I don't know. I've always had it. So, for example, I have always been driven and motivated. I had little businesses, yard cleaning, lemonade stands. I've always wanted money and purchasing power. The day I turned 14, I had my working card, and I went and I had a job already lined up. I worked the day after my 14th birthday was my first shift, because
I don't even know what a working card is. What is that?
So at least in New York State, it's probably different state by state. If you are under the age, I think it's 16, you have to actually go to your school and get a working permit. And you're only allowed to work certain hours. You can't work like during the work week past 8 o'clock or something. I worked weekends at a restaurant. And I've always, because I wanted things. My sisters all had little 13-inch TVs in their bedroom. I wanted a 20-inch, right? I always wanted something bigger and better than what they had. And my parents were like, okay, fine, get a job. And then for the next 2 years, they had to drive me every weekend, everywhere. They'd pick me up from work, drop me off at work. I didn't have a license yet. When I went to school, I originally went to Ohio State. I started my own painting company there. Exterior residential painting. I didn't care about school. I just wanted to build the painting company. I had 2 trucks. I had like 10 employees. It was crazy. I leased an office myself, a painting company. We didn't need an office. I didn't know how to do accounting. All my accounting was wrong, but I had an office, right? And so I've always had this drive that.
Well, did you finish at Ohio State?
No. So this is part of grit. So I ended up voluntarily myself stopping Ohio State before they told me, we don't want you anymore. Ran this painting business right into the ground. It didn't matter anyways, because it was 2007. The world was about to blow up anyways. And guess what would have been the first thing people cut from their budget? Painting the exterior of their house. Yes.
Right.
So then I moved up to Michigan. So I was there with my sister and at her time boyfriend and now husband. And the 3 of us lived up there. I got into HVAC. I had no idea how to do any of this, but I was selling heating and cooling equipment residentially in Lansing, Michigan, before the car companies were bailed out. So
you went from Ohio State to Michigan State.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly it. And then I had to have one of those moments where it's like, well, what am I doing with my life? Do I want to be an HVAC salesman the rest of my life? No. So I moved home, moved to my parents' basement, went to community college in Rochester, got straight A's, transferred out to SUNY Albany, where I met my wife. And from there, I had a laser focus of getting to Wall Street. I wanted to work down in the city at a Wall Street bank. And I was SUNY Albany. So through networking, getting good grades, I corrected mistakes I had made in the past. I was able to get an internship at Citi. And when I went down there to interview and got these interviews, people looked at me and they're holding my resume. They're like, SUNY Albany, how the hell did you get here? I'm like, oh, I'm a good old fashioned way, just by walking and knocking, like make a joke. So there is a pedigree to get into Wall Street. And it's what makes it even difficult although I am a white male, I wasn't the type that typically gets down there. Or
no kidding.
On your location. And it's because I'm from SUNY Albany. They're like, what the hell is a state school they don't recruit from Albany. The amount of people each year who graduate from SUNY Albany who land the front office roles in investment banks, super small, probably count them on one hand. And so it's just, I had a goal, I was able to get through it, and you work your way through it. And I don't know what causes me to think like that and dream big and set these really big ambitious goals, and then start a company with Stephanie, and we have these big ambitious goals. It's how I've always been wired since I was the earliest age.
That's cool. So
Learn, like if somebody hustles, it's dumb. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to picture you in a Wall Street bank wearing a suit, and I just can't imagine it.
Well, I did for a long time. I would refuse. No, thankfully, no tie. I'm not a tie guy. You know, I always describe myself of I am an Irish bar, you know, not total dive Irish bar, but like on the lower end of things. I don't like fancy. Like, give me there and a nice cold beer and a shot of Jameson and good stories.
Well, you just told a good story, so thank you. So it's really interesting because my wife is from Dayton, Ohio, and everyone in her family, everyone went to the Ohio State, and
trademark,
and they love the fact that I'm from Michigan, and so they love bashing Michigan. Except lately, I've been able to turn the tables on them.
Yeah, not so good the past couple of years. Yeah.
Well, it's good from my perspective.
Yeah.
But my brother went to Michigan State, but I passed through Lansing, but I've never spent any time there. I don't even know what it's like. Because I went to Kalamazoo College, you know, way over on the western part of the state.
Yep.
A gigantic 1,400 student school. It was just awesome. But that was a great story. You know, I think these grit stories are always fascinating. You never know what you're going to get when you ask somebody about where their grit comes from.
Yeah, I think I've always had it, but I don't think that that's the only way. I think you can develop grit over time and through experiences. I've always been that way, but you can develop that, and it's a mental mindset of, look, I'll tell you who the grittiest founders are: solo founders. I don't know how a solo founder does it, because without Stephanie, it's so hard. Like, you know, Jothy, it is so hard building, and there's self-doubt that creeps in at times. You have a really good day, and then you have a terrible day, and you're like, what am I doing? Right? And it's just having that strength of having a good partner who can help level those highs and lows, so that it's always a roller coaster, but at least you need the help when you go down on the bad days. Those are the hardest days for founders, and that's where that grit and just saying, you know what, I'm going to go to bed, and I'm going to wake up tomorrow, and it's going to be a better goddamn day.
Yeah. Yep. Well, you know, doing 9 startups, I had some very dark days, and this one the darkest, the cybersecurity one. You know,
yeah,
just so hard. This one was so hard, and
yeah,
you know, after you know, we parted ways, I ended up having to lay off everybody in the company, except for me, and rebuild it, and now we're selling it, and we'll see how that goes. But I think, you know, we're not. It's not going to be an awesome sale. I've gotten to the point where what I want is to see this amazing technology with all these patents plaques are up on the wall right there, turn into something, and what it needs is a lot more resources than we can ever bring to bear. So we need to get bought by somebody big who cares about it, who values it. And, and presumably I would work with them for a couple of years to, integrate it in and whatnot. But, well, anyway, look, this has been great. I think we're at a good stopping point. I really appreciate you guys doing this. It's a different perspective to talk to somebody that's in this middle point between the sources of funding and the people that need it. And I hope you do so well, because it is such a great idea. It is such, you can make founders' lives so much better. And it sounds like you really have a nice value proposition to the VCs who don't necessarily always have who they want to build that syndicate. And they want to probably move quickly to fill out their syndicate once they've made a decision that this is something they want to do. And, if somebody's doing a Series A, great, you lead the Series A and you're up for 5 million, except the total round needs to be 10, right? So that's a more reasonable size for a Series A, 10, maybe 15. So anyway, we're going to obviously
say it's all doom and gloom out there. We are seeing positive growth. It's slow. There's signals. We just had our first deal this year where we got multiple investors in. So one of our deals now has 4 investors and counting. It's just, deals are getting done. They're just harder. The bar is higher than what it was 2-3 years ago. And we are optimistic for next year, right?
Good.
And as rate cuts come, the IPO market will open up, which will open up some liquidity options for all of these funds, all of these LPs, and we think that will trickle down into the earliest stages of fundraising by the end of next year.
That is great. That's going to be a wrap for today. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode of Designing Successful Startups podcast. Remember to share and like us on your social media channels, and check out the show notes for additional resources and links. I'm Jothy Rosenberg saying, hasta la vista.